Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. It's 9 p.m. IST and we are coming to you live from the WION headquarters in Noida, India. I'm Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Vladimir Putin has attacked Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Russia is also strengthening its air defense in Crimea. As Putin's punishment for Ukraine continues, we tell you what's happening in the war zone. We also ask, does the G7 even have a plan to manage Russia? Here's a look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. Tibet is back on America's agenda. American lawmakers have passed a bill that challenges Chinese disinformation on Tibet. We tell you all that you need to know. We get you up to speed with the latest on the Kuwait fire tragedy, in which over 40 Indians were killed and more than 50 injured. We tell you all about a move to bring Thailand closer to China, quite literally. With Thailand planning to expand its rail network, we tell you all about the new rail link that aims to make train travel between Bangkok and Beijing a reality. All this and more coming up tonight on Gravitas. Stay tuned. Vladimir Putin has struck Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. Ukraine says this was the deadliest attack in weeks. We told you last night how Russia is punishing Ukraine. With this deadly Russian ballistic missile strike, Putin's punishment for Ukraine continues. Let's first tell you more about the damage caused on the ground. The Russian strike on Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown killed at least 8 people and left more than 20 injured. This is the place I'm talking about. Crimea in southern Ukraine. It lies in the industrial Dnipropetrovsk region. The attack damaged an administrative building and an apartment block. The Ukrainian leader posted video footage, in fact, from the scene of the attack, showing rescue workers looking through the debris for the survivors, with smoke billowing from a destroyed building. This is what the Interior Minister Igor Klimenko said on social media. I'm quoting, "The death count has risen to 8 people. At least 21 people were injured, including 2 children. Another 4 people are missing." Russia, in fact, is also strengthening its air defense in Crimea. As per reports, it is moving to secure the strategic Kerch Bridge, which connects Russia to Crimea with its latest and most capable S-500 air defense system. In case you weren't aware, the strategic Kerch Bridge connects the Russian mainland to the Crimean Peninsula. It is regularly used by Russia to transport troops and arms to Crimea. Basically, the bridge is always in use and has a lot of strategic significance. According to Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kirillo Budanov, Russian forces have installed their latest S-500 air defense system in Crimea. Let me quote from what he said as per reports. The Russian air defense system is being strengthened. This is quite obvious and understandable. The newest elements of the S-500 have appeared. In principle, this will be their experimental application, but they have already appeared there in Crimea. Budanov, like I said, is the head of the Ukrainian military intelligence service and has been a major figure in the conflict, of course. What he said is extremely significant. You see, the S-500 is Russia's latest and most capable air defense system. The Ukrainian General Staff announced earlier that Ukraine's military had destroyed 2 radars of the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems in several areas of Crimea. Basically, if what Budanov has said is really happening, it would mean that with Ukraine targeting Russia's air defenses in Crimea, Russia is not taking any chances. It is leaving no stone unturned to protect the critical facilities in Crimea and is deploying its most capable air defense system. But will this prove to be a game changer remains the question. Just for context here, the S-500 is Russia's most advanced long-range anti-aircraft system. It is designed to complement the existing S-400 systems and provide a new level of missile defense. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, the S-500 is designed to intercept short to medium-range threats. Another crucial element is its purported ability to neutralize threats across different altitudes and speeds. The system can reportedly defend against ballistic, cruise, and hypersonic missiles. According to Russia, it is the most advanced anti-missile system in the world. It has hailed the S-500 anti-aircraft missile system as one that remains unmatched globally. So Russia is clearly preparing for the worst. What about Ukraine? Following the latest Russian strike on Zelensky's hometown, which has been targeted by Russian forces throughout the invasion, Zelensky called on Ukraine's allies to step up deliveries of sophisticated aerial batteries to ward off Russian aerial attacks. He said, and I'm quoting, "Modern air defense systems can provide maximum protection for people, our cities, and our positions, and we need them as much as possible." But are his allies listening, is the question. But then what other option does Ukraine even have at this point, apart from calling on its allies to do more? You see, what we have told you about is just the damage on the ground as a result of that strike. In symbolic terms, the damage is a lot more. Like I said, Russia's punishment for Ukraine continues to strike. And from the looks of it, it will only get worse. So that's what's happening in the war zone. Let's just zoom out now and go to the Apulia region in Italy. That's where the leaders of the G7 countries are meeting for their annual summit. G7 is short for Group of Seven. It is an informal grouping of industrialized democracies, namely the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the UK. The European Union also participates in all the discussions. It is represented by presidents of the European Council and the European Commission. The G7 meets every year to discuss issues concerning the economy, geopolitics, global security. There is no doubt that the war in Ukraine would be high on the agenda. After all, the G7 members, most of whom are also part of the NATO, have been the staunchest supporters of Ukraine. But then here's the big question. Does the G7 have a solid plan for Ukraine? The bloc claims it does. The plan is to use frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine defense. In fact, the US has come up with this idea. You see, when the war started, the G7, along with the European Union, froze Russian assets worth $325 billion. What do you do with these assets? International law does not allow these countries to confiscate Russian assets, and so they've found loopholes. What the G7 is planning to do now essentially is to give money to Ukraine in loans by using the interest on Russian assets. You get the plan? And through this scheme, the G7 members will be basically able to give around $50 billion to Ukraine. 50 billion. This money will be dispersed through multiple channels, and it will go towards Ukraine's military, budget, and the country's reconstruction work. Now, apart from this, G7 leaders are also expected to make separate announcements. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will reportedly be announcing up to $309 million towards Ukraine's energy and humanitarian needs. US President Joe Biden is expected to sign a security agreement with Ukraine. Through this agreement, Washington will commit to supply military assistance to Kiev for 10 long years. And what do you think explains this long timeline? In one word, fear. Here's a question. What happens if former US President Donald Trump wins the November election? Will he continue to support Ukraine? And here's another question. Does this agreement that Biden is signing with his Ukrainian counterpart really guarantee all-weather support for Kiev? No, it does not. You see, this is an agreement, not a treaty. The US Congress will not be ratifying or giving a formal consent to this commitment, which essentially means that over the next 10 years, any future president can choose to walk out of this agreement. Which then brings me back to the question, does the G7 really have a solid plan? Even after the $50 billion loan is signed, what stops Russia from escalating its offensive? From sending more missiles and drones to strike Ukraine? How many of you know that Russia once belonged to the Forum? G7 was G8, but in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. Soon, it was thrown out of the bloc. And that, by the way, did not stop Russia from waging a full-blown war on Ukraine. We just showed you how Russia is striking deep into Ukraine. Zelensky's hometown has been hit. Russian President Putin is also threatening to punish countries that are arming Ukraine with long-range missiles. We also have visuals of the Russian warship and nuclear submarine in Cuba. Let's play them out for you. This is Russia sending a message to Ukraine's allies as they shake hands in Italy's Apulia. This is where the region is on the map. Apulia is in the southern peninsular part of Italy. Before the Greeks came to Apulia, the region used to be inhabited by the Lapygians or the Apulians. Over various periods in history, Apulia was ruled by ancient Romans, the Byzantines, the Aragonese, and the Spanish. Apulia is home to golden beaches, crystal clear water, picturesque landscape, and delicious food. As the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, hosts the G7 leaders there in Apulia, her government will ensure that no stone is left unturned as far as their hospitality is concerned. Also, you must know that leaders from a whole host of other countries outside the G7 are also attending that summit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is flying down to Apulia. Ukraine's Zelensky is also in Apulia, as are leaders from Brazil, Argentina, Turkey, the UAE, Kenya, Algeria, Tunisia. This is where the leaders are meeting. The Borgo Egnasia Luxury Resort. It is midway between Brindisi and Bari. The five-star resort has 6 restaurants. One of them has a Michelin. There's also a spa and multiple swimming pools. The resort is built in Pulian style using white yellow stones. The rooms here have pure white walls, low lightings. The rooms here also cost around $1,400 a night. Meaning, if you want to stay here, you will have to shell out a minimum of $110,000 per night just on room rent. But if you can afford this luxury, then you will be treated like a king. Candles will line every passage. Every night, a large pot of rose petals and salt will be left in your room for your baths, to forget your worries, or de-stress after a day of negotiations on how best to stop Russia's war on Ukraine. This is Massimo Bottura. He is a 3-star Michelin chef, and he will be hosting the leaders in the luxury resort in Puglia. Bottura plans to serve them the ultimate comfort food. And his signature dish, the crunchy part of the lasagna. Also on the menu is beef from Piedmont, cooked with truffles and Barolo wine, Sardinian lobster, risotto, Venetian fish, soup with streamed crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, tomato-flavored ice cream. There is someone who will be missing out on the delicious menu, though. The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. He will be skipping the G7 summit because he will be overseeing the works of the Hajj season. But as rest of the leaders gather in Italy and talk about the war in Ukraine, there is a report that says less than 3% of the G7 military spending could help end global hunger and solve the global South debt crisis. Oxfam International's head of inequality policy, Max Lawson, said, and I'm quoting here, "Governments are finding their pockets run deep to fund war today. But when it comes to stopping starvation, they are suddenly broke. We are talking about a small commitment with the potential for huge impact. Imagine a world where no one goes to bed hungry, and where countries in the global south can put money into public schools and hospitals instead of debt interest payments. The G7 not only has the means, but the moral and strategic imperative to make this happen," quote unquote. And Lawson is right. The G7, after all, has the means, but the big question is, does it have the will? As Ukraine burns, Gaza suffers, and tensions continue to escalate in the Red Sea and the Taiwan Strait, a near-forgotten plateau of conflict has suddenly returned to America's agenda: Tibet. Tibet, an independent nation till China's Mao Zedong's communists sent an army to annex it in 1950, using the dubious excuse that Tibet had been part of China since ancient times. A claim which Tibetans led by the Venerable Dalai Lama vehemently oppose. This week, American lawmakers passed a Tibet policy bill. What this bill essentially does is challenge Chinese disinformation on Tibet. We start off with the basics here. This is the bill. It's called the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act. Now have a look at what this bill says. Number 1, the claims made by China and the Chinese Communist Party that Tibet has been a part of China since ancient times are historically inaccurate. Number 2, the bill asserts that Chinese communists are attempting to destroy Tibet's Buddhism and Buddhist culture, that Chinese policies are systematically suppressing the ability of the Tibetans to preserve their religion, culture, language, history, way of life, and environment. Number 3, China has not engaged in meaningful dialogue with the Dalai Lama and hence it is failing to meet the expectations of the United States. The Dalai Lama, then just 24 years old, managed to flee brutal Chinese oppression against him and Buddhist lamas in Lhasa, barely managed to save his life, and sought and got asylum in 1959. Number 4, the bill asks American diplomats to counter disinformation about Tibet. This makes it incumbent upon American diplomats to work actively against China on the Tibet issue in all their missions. And this includes countering disinformation on the people of Tibet. The history of Tibet, Tibetan institutions, including the institution of the Dalai Lama, who is the highest spiritual leader in Tibet, and also the head of Tibetan Buddhism. So this is what the bill states. The American government must demand by the law of the land to insist on a dialogue between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese authorities, which, by the way, has not happened since 2010. Now, it's not a question of whether America will succeed. What is extremely important here is that American diplomats must put Tibet back on the agenda. China believes that it has buried the conflict over Tibet, that it has been forgotten by the world, and indeed, it seemed so. That amnesia is over. So let's just look at the bigger picture here. Let's look at the vital details buried in the fine print. The international Tibet movement for freedom from China has got a major boost. The Dalai Lama, who lives in Dharamshala in the Indian Himalayas, is the mentor and also is the mentor of a government that looks after the interests of the Tibetans driven from their homeland, has got a new spur. China condemns the Dalai Lama in the worst abusive language regularly, by the way. America has sent a signal that it is ready to be a friend of the Tibetans again. And this reopens a flashpoint. This bill was tabled by a Democratic senator from Oregon. His name is Jeff Merkley. Both the houses of the Congress have now passed the bill. What happens next? Before we answer that, let's quickly go back in history. Tibetans have never accepted that they are part of China. Chinese troops massacred Tibetans in 1959 when they conquered Lhasa. This was a year after the proclamation of the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong said that the so-called liberation of Tibet was his top priority when no Tibetan wanted to be liberated by the Chinese. This conquest was codenamed Chamdo by the Chinese armed forces in 1950. And since then, Tibet has been suppressed as a colony of China. This operation was codenamed Chamdo. As I just said, the PLA crossed the Dinsha or the Yangtze River and it entered Kham in the early hours of October 7. Tibet had a small, ill-equipped army. It was no match to the PLA's might. By October 19, the town of Chamdo had fallen. 3,000 Tibetans were made prisoners. The defeated governor of Chamdo was forced to go to the 24-year-old Dalai Lama with a proposal to accept the annexation. The Dalai Lama refused, with the Chinese army at their throat, with guns killing unarmed civilians at random. Tibetans did not have a chance or a real choice. The Chinese assured the Tibetans that the latter's culture and religion would be protected. This has not happened. The Chinese destroyed Buddhist monasteries. They imposed their communist system on Buddhist schools. In short, China started turning Tibet into a replica of communist China. And this fueled resistance, which erupted full scale in the year 1959 in Lhasa. Defenseless Lhasa was shelled. The Dalai Lama fled Lhasa and reached the Indian border in Arunachal Pradesh on the 30th of March, 1959. And as he was being escorted to Tawang in India's Arunachal Pradesh, the young Dalai Lama publicly asserted that he was Tibet's sole legitimate representative and that the Chinese were usurpers and invaders. Around that time, Dwight Eisenhower was serving his second term as the president of the US. America decided to help the Tibet resistance movement, and this obviously had to be done covertly. I have with me a very interesting telegram that was sent from the US Embassy in India to the US Department of State ahead of Eisenhower's December 1959 visit to India. Let me read out some portions for you. I'm quoting. I have informed Foreign Secretary Dutt that we had received informal requests for interview Dalai Lama with President from former's New Delhi office. Dutt replied that he thought it would be most unfortunate if the Dalai Lama should attempt to see the president. Efforts as suggested to keep the interview entirely private without press fanfare would be impossible to achieve. A controversial matter would be injected into the president's goodwill visit, which is being so warmly welcomed. As such, as the governments and people of India, it would cast cloud on the whole visit. It would heighten suspicion of Chicoms and add fuel to their charge, which Dutt characterized as insulting. That the government of India was being pressured by the US government to encourage Tibetan resistance. Eisenhower did not meet the Dalai Lama in India, but America continued to support the Tibetans. The resistance was active for over 20 years, spanning across the administrations of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson. It was an unequal conflict, although the 14th Dalai Lama's elder brother, Gyalo Thondup, led the resistance. In 1969, Richard Nixon became the president of the US. Nixon wanted to improve ties with China, and he abandoned the Tibetan resistance at the advice of his NSA, Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was treated by the Chinese as their lifelong friend. For Tibetans, it was a second betrayal. In the year 1972, Nixon visited China. The price was paid by Tibet. The resistance faltered and then came to an end. We are now in 2024, 5 decades since that historic visit. Is China doing a U-turn as far as its policy is concerned? Also, what really is America's Tibet policy? Let's look at what the US Department of State has to say. I'm reading from this document here. The US recognizes the Tibetan Autonomous Region and Tibetan Autonomous Prefectures and counties in other provinces to be part of the People's Republic of China. Now look at what the bill that American lawmakers have passed says. The US government has never taken the position that Tibet was a part of China since ancient times. Basically, it is back to square one. The US, you see, is reopening a front. It is challenging Chinese narrative on Tibet. Washington is basically telling China that Tibet is not Beijing's internal matter. It is a story of suppression. It is a story of human rights abuse, perhaps also of illegal occupation. What happens next is anybody's guess. And let's go straight back across to Puglia in Italy, where the G7 leaders have arrived. Joe Biden, just a short while back, spoke. Let's listen in.
More than $60 billion in investments around the world thus far. That's double where we were last year. Now we've still got a long way to go to close the infrastructure gap that holds too many countries back. But together, I think we're showing that democracies can deliver. This is an important moment to be able to do that. And when you focus on people, transparency, and high standards, on quality and sustainability, it doesn't inhibit investment; it attracts investment. I got criticized at home for asking when the federal government invests in something that discourage or encourage private sector to invest. 96% of the people asked said encourages investment, not discourages investment. It attracts investment, and people around this table are proof of that. I would argue. That includes Mr. Fink. I call you Larry, I'm calling you Mr. Fink. But we go back a long way, BlackRock and Mr. Nadella of Microsoft, an outfit that we know well home. Today, BlackRock and other partners are committing to invest at least $4 billion $4 billion toward infrastructure projects that align with our PGI priorities. And Microsoft recently announced $5 billion investment into digital infrastructure, including $1 billion for a data center in Kenya. That's a really big deal. This is because the G7 and our partners created opportunities for sound investments in infrastructure. And we mobilized our own capital and created efficient ways to de-risk projects so the private sector could get on board more easily. And you are getting on board, and that's not just U.S. companies. So.
Let's now talk about something that's happening, a move to bring Thailand closer to China. How exactly? Through a new rail link that aims to make train travel between Bangkok and Beijing a reality. This new rail link will boost connectivity between Thailand, Laos and China. What's the route like? How long will the train journey take? What's the expectation and what's the plan? Our next report telling you more.
Imagine this. You hop on a train that takes you from Bangkok to Beijing. Well, if that excites you, it could soon turn from a dream to a reality. As reported by Bloomberg, Thailand is preparing to expand its rail network. Let's tell you what the plan is. The country will run a trial service between Bangkok and Laos's capital, Vientiane. This will be between July 13th and 14th. So, what can we expect? Let's break it down for you. The Thailand-Laos connection would basically mean that one can travel by train from Bangkok to China's capital via stops in Laos's capital and the southern Chinese city of Kunming, where there is a separate semi-high-speed service to Beijing. So to put it simply, it is a huge step towards improving connectivity. The new link will go a long way in improving transport between the two countries and China. How long will the journey take? Almost a full day. Just for context here, if you were to take a non-stop flight, how long would it take? Just short of 5 hours. So yes, that's a huge difference. And by the way, it's not just about improving transport and connectivity. It is a huge step towards greater economic integration as well. You see, China is Thailand's top trading partner. The Southeast Asian nation exports to China totaled almost $32 billion in the first 11 months of last year. Its imports from China were valued at $65.3 billion in the same period. And with this new rail link, tourism is expected to get a major boost as well.
"45 Indian victims who died in the devastating fire in Kuwait have been identified. The deadly fire engulfed a building housing around 195 migrant workers in southern Kuwait's Mangaf area on Wednesday. Kuwait authorities, in the latest, have detained 3 people on charges of manslaughter. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called the incident saddening and said that the Indian embassy in Kuwait is closely monitoring the situation. He also announced relief of $2,400 for the families of the killed Indian nationals from the Prime Minister Relief Fund, apart from instructing the government to extend all possible assistance to the people. Also in the latest, the Minister of State for External Affairs reached Kuwait to oversee the assistance for those injured in the fire tragedy. And upon his arrival, he visited the Jaber Hospital to meet Indians injured in that incident. According to a post by the Indian Embassy in Kuwait, Singh has outlined the repatriation plan for the deceased, stating that DNA tests are being conducted to identify the victims. Many of the bodies are severely burned and charred beyond recognition, which makes these tests important. He further mentioned that an Air Force plane is on standby and will transport the bodies back to India.
The situation is that the victims are mostly burn victims, and some of the bodies have been charred beyond recognition. So a DNA test is underway to identify the victims, and the Air Force plane is on the ready. And as soon as the bodies are identified, their kin will be informed, and our Air Force plane will bring the bodies back.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meanwhile spoke to his Kuwaiti counterpart about the fire tragedy and urged the early repatriation of the mortal remains of those who lost their lives. India's Ministry of External Affairs also released a statement confirming that the injured are receiving medical care in 5 governmental hospitals and they are in a stable condition. The embassy is currently working with the Kuwaiti authorities and the involved company to obtain comprehensive details. According to officials, the majority of those deceased were Indian nationals from Kerala, Tamil Nadu and the North Indian states. As per the Tamil Nadu Minister for Minorities Welfare, 5 Tamils were among the deceased. The Tamil Nadu government is now taking steps to repatriate the bodies and provide medical care for the injured. As per local media in Kuwait, the deadly fire engulfing the apartment building in Al Mangaf area could have been due to a gas leak. As per the Kuwait Times, reports indicated that it could have been a gas leak from the building's ground floor, although no official confirmation or reason has been given as yet by the authorities for the cause of the fire. Meanwhile, Kuwait's Minister of Public Works and Minister of Municipality have been suspended after that tragic incident. Imagine this. You are driving alone through picturesque scenery with windows rolled down, the wind blowing in your hair. Sounds beautiful, right? But what if I told you that you are not alone? Chances are you are being spied on by your car insurance company. Sounds scary, right? You must be aware of the term credit score. But do you know what a driving score is? It's basically a metric used by car insurance companies to assess an individual's driving skills. How fast or slow are you driving? Are you applying hard brakes? Are you driving during the day or at night? Are you using your mobile phone while driving? All these factors can influence your driving score. So how does this score actually affect the common man? The number you score will automatically have an effect on the rate that you pay to your car insurance company. Now, for years, car insurance companies have been trying to get people to enroll in usage-based insurance plans. Under such programs, insurance companies are free to monitor the person's day-to-day driving skills, and this allows the companies to increase or decrease the car's insurance money depending on the test result. The adoption rate of such programs, however, has been dismal. And why is that? Privacy-minded consumers have been reluctant to sign up. They are wary of continuous data collection and its potential misuse. But now companies have found a new way to track consumer driving skills. They are using smartphone applications to keep an eye on drivers. And what's alarming is that most people don't even know the insurance industry is tracking them in this way. And if you think the data is being tracked through insurance company applications, let me tell you, they are not. Drivers are being tracked through third-party apps like Gas Buddy, Life 360, or My Radar. As per reports, these phone app companies then sell the illegally obtained data to auto insurance companies. Note here that while these apps claim that the data is recorded only after user consent, the reality could be a lot different. Most of these apps' privacy statement agreements are in small print. They do not clearly state sometimes what information is being actually recorded. So here's what you can do to keep yourself away from the prying eyes of auto insurance companies. First, do not download random applications. Check for the app developer's license before you download one. Second, read the car's manual. look into the automaker's app and go through its data policies properly. Third, block or remove ad tracking cookies and applications. Not only do they track your phone's activity, they also collect large amounts of user data, which is then sold to data brokers for marketing purposes. And lastly, switch off your phone's location whenever possible. While keeping a driving score might help in improving people's driving skills, it might also lead to unfair rates by the insurance company. And there are chances that such apps may not take into consideration the driving situation, like the traffic, the weather, or the road infrastructure, which can then lead to misleading or inaccurate scores. And most importantly, fear of misuse of data will always remain the #1 concern for the people. And time now for Gravitas Recall, and tonight we are talking about Pioneer 10. 41 years ago on this very day, Pioneer 10 became the first man-made object to leave the solar system. The spacecraft was designed by NASA. Its mission was to basically study the Jupiter, especially its atmosphere, magnetosphere and satellites. Pioneer 10 was launched on the 2nd of March 1972. It crossed Mars and entered the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter in June 1972. And while traveling through this belt, the spacecraft was hit by some asteroids, but Pioneer 10 successfully made it out of the belt within 8 months. The spacecraft flew by Jupiter in 1973. It fulfilled all the mission objectives except one, which was due to false commands triggered by Jupiter's intense radiation. And after flying past Jupiter, Pioneer 10 crossed Saturn. It crossed the Neptune on June 13, 1983. And it became the first human-made object to go beyond our solar system. Pioneer 10 was designed to last for a 21-month mission, but its lifetime far exceeded the expectations. Pioneer 10 lasted over 30 years, sending its last signal to planet Earth in January 2003. At that point, Pioneer 10 was 12.23 billion kilometers from the Earth. The signal took 11 hours and 20 minutes to reach our planet. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks very much for watching.